Okay, good afternoon. I might as well sit here as we do this together. My name is Evan Weiner, and this is a story about an election that you probably have no idea its importance and the year of its importance. Anyway, what we're looking at here is the 1897. That's the year we're talking about, 1897. And William McKinley becomes the President of the United States. There's a massacre in a place called Latimer in Arkansas. The Arkansas race riots take place. Lynchings, common theme in the 1890s and the 1900s. Women's rights denied, and I'm going to read you this. In the 1800s, American women had fewer rights than a male inmate in an insane asylum. Women could not could not vote, serve on a jury, testify in court, hold public office, attend college, or practice law. If a woman were married, it was illegal for her to sign a contract, inherit property, own or inherit property, keep or invest her own earnings, have automatic rights to her children. If you got a divorce, the father is probably going to get the children. Also, women were expected to center their lives around their family and home, obey their husbands. I don't have any men in here, so let me ask you about it. Should you all obey your husbands, no matter what your husband says?
No.
No?
No.
Gotta get a man in here. Get a man in here. And anyway, not voice strong opinions in public. You can't have an opinion and tell anybody about it unless you're among yourselves. And behave in a refined, polite manner. That was the job of a woman in the 1890s. There was a strike it rich, the gold rush in the Klondike. That's the Klondike Museum in Seattle, Washington. American isolationism. That is Alaska. That was the only territory that the United States had in 1897. That's the Hubbard Glacier up in Alaska. The first subway was in Boston, and this is the first subway station in Boston near the State House. Boston had the first subway in the United States. Anybody owned an Oldsmobile back in the day? You did? Well, the first Oldsmobile, here it is. Our first Oldsmobile back in 1897. So you could have bought an Oldsmobile back then. Grant's tomb is open, which I have a question for you. Who's buried in Grant's tomb?
Not Grant.
Actually, no one. It's a mausoleum for him and his wife, Julia. So, if anybody ever asks you, who's buried in Grant's tomb? It's not Grant. There's no tomb. The first feature film. The first feature film was a boxing match between James Corbett and Bob Fitzsimmons. And only reproduction of this great fight at Carson City, Nevada, March 17, 1897, for the heavyweight championship of the world. This picture, complete, depicting clearly every moment in the ring. Actually, a piece of it survives today. Very little of it survives, but it's out there. And it was the first major film ever shown in the world. That was in 1897. Oh, the computer. Do you know that the word computer appeared in 1897? 1897, the first use of, did you know that? Now you know. First use of the word computer, 1897. And that's television, 1897. There was television in at least there was something that could show you television in 1897. Wasn't fully developed yet, but this is the tube that eventually would lead to the formation of what you now know, or what you used to know, because there are no picture tubes anymore, television. This guy invented the ice cream scoop. Do you have a scoop out there?
No.
No?
Yeah, I do.
You do? Well, his name is Alfred Crail, and he invented the ice cream scoop. Did you know that? 1897. Scoop it right out. 1897. Dracula comes out. 1897. Bram Stoker. So if you look at 1897, you say, well, that's ancient history, right? There's a lot of things happen that you use to this day, like seeing a Dracula movie. New York Times, all the news that's fit to print, it came out that saying in 1897. And yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. 1897, I worked for the last incarnation of the New York Sun about 20 years ago, and the question, dear editor, I'm 8 years old, some of my little friends say there's no Santa Claus. There is a Santa Claus, if you want it to be Santa Claus. The 1896 presidential campaign, all about money and tariffs. Tariffs and money, that was what it was all about, 1896. And this is the king of the tariffs, the Napoleon of protectionism. William McKinley, he faced William Jennings Bryan. He won that election. In the 1896 presidential election, the Republican William McKinley thought of himself as a tariff man. Expected the monetary issues would fade away. He was mistaken. Silver and gold dominated the campaign. His opponent was William Jennings Bryan, a Democrat and populist, and his entire campaign was all about money. America was reeling from the panic or depression of 1893, caused in part by William McKinley, who in 1890 pushed through legislation in the House of Representatives. It was called the McKinley tariffs. Prices skyrocketed, jobs were lost, and by 1893, America was in the depression caused by these tariffs. The battleground was the Midwest. The South and most of the West was conceded to Bryan, and the Democrat spent much of his time in those crucial Midwestern states. Northeast was likely safe for McKinley after September victories in Maine and Vermont, and McKinley would go on to win. Republicans managed to attract urban progressive voters, attacking Bryan as a religious fanatic. In addition to painting a dire picture of what abandoning the gold standard would mean for the economy, the outgoing President Grover Cleveland did not support William Jennings Bryan. Puck, the magazine, talked about how Bryant was the most able candidate for the economy. But on November 3rd, the voters had their say. McKinley won the entire Northeast and Midwest. He won 51% of the vote and an ample majority in the Electoral College. McKinley gained strength from prosperous Midwestern farmers, industrial workers, and many ethnic voters. Bryan had concentrated solely on the silver issue. Let's put 16 one-ounce pieces of silver equals 1 ounce of gold. Let's flood the market with money, and that would help farmers, but that didn't appeal to urban workers. Voters in the cities supported McKinley, in the only city outside the South of more than 100,000 people that Bryan carried was Denver, Colorado. There is a change in America. This bridge, Williamsburg Bridge, didn't exist. The one behind it, the Brooklyn Bridge, had been up since 1883, but America is changing. On March 4th, McKinley was inaugurated as the 25th President of the United States, succeeding Grover Cleveland. His inaugural address emphasized economic recovery. There's that word, those words, protective tariffs. This guy was the king of tariffs, the Napoleon of, of protectionism, Napoleon of protectionism, and the need for national unity. Now, the bad economy, which he helped create, McKinley, back in 1890, helped McKinley to victory on the strength of an electoral map. The unemployment rate when he took over was 12.4%. When McKinley became president, the Depression or Panic of 1893 had almost run its course. Tariffs and the economy. New York Times, July 18, 1897. The end of the tariff fight. Tariffs were a big deal. They were talked about every day in 1897. They're talked about every day in 2025. 128 years later, still the same argument. Still the same argument. The Republicans in the House and Senate reached a final agreement, and this tariff zoomed up prices. McKinley called Congress into a special session to enact the highest tariff in American history until recently when China got hit with a 145% tariff. On July 24th, McKinley signed the Dingley Tariff Act into law. The act authorized reciprocal trade treaties. The act raised import duties to protect American industries from foreign competition, reflecting McKinley's commitment to protective tariffs as a means of promoting economic growth and stability. Tariffs is a consumer tax. That's what it is. Companies don't pay it. Consumers pay it. Other countries don't pay it. But he said, you know, this is going to help fund the government. 54%. McKinley gets lucky, really lucky. There's a gold rush in the Klondike, an area that is British North America, Canada, Alaska, in that area on the border up there. Because Seattle was the last American port before the Canadian Yukon, Seattle becomes extremely important. President Grover Cleveland ignored monopolies. Don't I look like the guy who's on the Monopoly card with the top hat and the cane saying pay port tax $15? Well, that's the Grover Cleveland Museum over in West Caldwell, New Jersey, and the curator said, put on the top hat, put on the cane. I said, well, you know, I'm putting on the Ritz here, walking with sticks and all that. She said, yeah. But anyway, so Grover Cleveland ignored monopolies, and monopolies and trusts became bigger and bigger and bigger, and workers were losing not only money, but rights as well. In the business-friendly atmosphere of the McKinley administration, industrial combinations developed at an unprecedented rate. Newspapers caricatured McKinley as a little boy led around by Nursey Hannah, Mark Hannah, who was his chief of staff, so to speak, the representatives of the trust. McKinley was not dominated by Hannah, and he condemned the trust as dangerous conspiracies against the public good. But he didn't put up a fight, even though he spoke highly of trying to break him up. He didn't break up any. Didn't bother. The Sherman Antitrust Act was signed into law on July 2nd, 1890 by the President Benjamin Harrison. It was the first federal law to outlaw monopolies, antitrust in industry, aiming to regulate interstate commerce, but it wouldn't be until 5 or 6 years later that Teddy Roosevelt went after the trust. And here are the trusts, and that's Mark Hannah in caricature, bringing the trusts ahead. And the trusts are kind of Goliath-like, except this guy's holding a baseball bat, which means we're going to win. The law was very poorly written and hard to interpret by the courts. The Gilded Age industrialists did business as usual. Neither the former president, Grover Cleveland, during his second term between 1893 and 1897, nor the President McKinley, nor the U.S. Attorney General in power showed any interest in breaking up the trusts or enforcing the Sherman Act. This is American life. This is Ellis Island. People coming in from Ellis into the United States at Ellis Island. And it says awaiting examination. Basically, if the way the immigration worked back in those days, if the United States had a treaty with another country, you were free to travel between the two countries. And a lot of the immigrants that were coming in were from Southern Europe and Eastern Europe at that time, and the United States had treaties. So the immigration was rather easy in those days and would remain rather easy for a period of time. The American economy was booming, leading to increased wages in a growing industrial sector, but not everyone was getting rich. Large number of immigrants, particularly from Europe, flocked to cities, contributing to urban overcrowding and challenging conditions. My family came from the tenements on the Lower East Side, and I lived there until I was 8 years old. So I know about overcrowded conditions and cockroaches and rats and all that other stuff, which is what these immigrants faced. West of Forsyth Street on the Lower East Side, that was the Italian section. East was the Jewish section. Issues of poverty, inequality, and exploitation of workers were prevalent, particularly in urban areas where tenements and slums were common. The Gilded Age was a time of wealth and extravagance for rich people, which helped cause significant social problems and was the cause of political corruption. On March 2nd, in one of his final acts as president, Grover Cleveland voted to amend the immigration laws of the United States, which would have banned illiterate immigrants. What do you mean by illiterate immigrants? Well, if you didn't know 50 words in your native language, you were considered illiterate and you couldn't come into the country, or that's what they tried to do. Cleveland said a long time ago the same thing was said of immigrants who, with their descendants, are now numbered among our best citizens. The fight over immigration will continue, or would continue. It continues to this day in 2025. The proponents of immigration laws wanted to keep Eastern Europeans, Southern Europeans out of the United States, specifically Jews and Catholics back then. This was a massacre. And if you go through history, which isn't taught in school, there seemingly was a massacre or two every year and lynchings every other day in the United States back during this time period. This is the Latimer Massacre. In August, the Honeybrook division of the Lee and Wilkes-Barre Coal Company laid off workers at its strip mines, cut the pay of the remaining employees, raised the fees for workers residing in the area's company towns. The company consolidated its mule stables, forcing teenage mule drivers to travel unpaid much farther each day to pick up their mules. After inconclusive talks, 25 to 35 teenage drivers struck on August 14. Scuffle between a supervisor and some coal miners led to an additional walkout by strip miners and underground coal miners. By August 16th, nearly 2,000 workers were on strike. Nearly all the miners joined the United Mine Workers on August 18th. Within 2 days, almost all the mines in the region had closed because of the spreading strike. First wave of strikes ended on August 23rd, after the company agreed to pay overtime, bring up wages to the regional average, allow miners to see their own doctors when injured, and no longer force miners to live in company-owned housing. You might hear the term company town. Basically, remember the song 16 Tons? It refers to, I owe my soul to the company store. Well, the company controlled where you lived, what you bought, how much you paid, and you were under control of these people. 16 Tons is partially about the company town, which you probably never thought of, but that's what it's about. A second strike began on August 25th. Teenage breaker boys at the A.S. Van Wickle coal breaker in the nearby village of Cullenbrand struck for higher wages as well. When Van Wickle attempted to use Slavic workers as strike breakers, Slavic, Eastern Europe, they were called scabs. It's one of the reasons why the Eastern Europeans weren't welcome. The Slavs also joined the strike. Although the strike spread to 2 other nearby coal companies, the company quickly raised wages up to regional average. That strike ends on about August 28th. But here we go. This is the sheriff, James Martin, the high sheriff of Luzerne County in Pennsylvania, where this is taking place. This is a proclamation. When the new pay rates were announced on September 1st, only a few members received the rates and raises. Management did agree to treat Slavic workers more fairly, but the mine owners reneged on the other promises. The strike resumed. September 3rd, 3,000 workers marched on 4 mines, shutting them down. And this is the Luzerne County Sheriff, James F. Martin. He's going to have something to say about what's going on. The mine owners' private armed force. These days, there were a lot of strikes. 1894, there was a Pullman porter car strike. Grover Cleveland sent in the army to basically bust the heads of the strikers. And that's what happened in a lot of strikes. You go on strike, you risk your life. You risk having your head busted open by not only the owners hiring a private force, but also the government, the sheriff here. The mine owners' private force, the Coal and Iron Police, proved to be too few in number to break the strike, so the owners appealed for help from the Luzerne County Sheriff, James F. Martin. Martin established a posse of about 100 English and Irishmen to prevent any marches. But within 5 days, 8,000 to 10,000 miners were on strike. On September 8th, mine owners demanded that the sheriff of Schuylkill County, which is around Philadelphia, arrest several thousand miners who had assembled near Pottsville and had forced the mine to shut down. But the sheriff refused. And here you got the guys with the guns shooting and killing the miners and the workers. The Latimer Massacre occurred on September 10th. The conflict erupted when an unarmed group of mostly Eastern European immigrant mine workers clashed with militarily armed sheriff's deputies who acted on behalf of private coal companies. 19 strikers died at the scene. Dozens more were wounded. Many had been shot in the back and several had multiple gunshot wounds, which indicated they had been targeted by the deputies. Another trial certain for Sheriff Martin and the other Latimer murderers. What is the crime in Pennsylvania anyhow? That's a cartoon in one of the local newspapers. Sheriff Martin and 73 deputies were arrested, put on trial. At the trial, the deputies claimed that the marchers had refused to obey in order to disperse and were charging toward the sheriff and his deputies. Guess what? The sheriff and the deputies are acquitted. They're just following orders, that's all. The massacre got the mine workers to join the more than 10,000 miners who had become members of the United Mine Workers, and that strengthened that union. Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. Basically, as long as you got what looks to be equal classrooms for kids who are black as to those who are white, it's perfectly legal to segregate in the United States. Supreme Court said so. On May 18th, 1896, Supreme Court decision in Plessy v. Ferguson, which upheld the separate but equal doctrine, is considered the landmark case in the establishment of Jim Crow. This ruling legitimized the segregation laws that were already in place in the South and contributed to the formalization of the Jim Crow system. While the Oklahoma Territory, it wasn't a state yet. In fact, the Oklahoma Territory was Sequoia and also Oklahoma. It was supposed to be 2 states. That was what it was supposed to be. One would be basically for Native Americans and the other for white settlers. That never happened. Anyway, the territorial legislature passed a law requiring segregated schools. The separate coach bill was also known as Senate Bill 1. It was the first state law, even though Oklahoma wasn't a state yet, it's territory, by Oklahoma requiring separate facilities for different races. Meanwhile, on March 13th, the Dibble Act in California was signed. This act, introduced by Henry Clay Dibble and Theophilus Morton, aimed to prevent discrimination in public accommodations in California. Lawless Negroes, Atkins race law. You see a lot of, if you go through old newspapers, old clippings of newspapers, you see a lot of this, lawless Negroes, because that's what it was thought back in those days after the Civil War. Causing much trouble in Pope County, one of their number taken from his home and beaten nearly to death, and local authorities didn't do anything about it, which is typical. In what most newspapers called the Atkins race riot, occurred in Lee Township, Pope County in late May, early June, in what appears to be an unprovoked attack. A group of African Americans attacked 2 white men, Jesse Nichols and J.R. Hodges, just south of Atkins, Pope County, on May 30th. In subsequent encounters, several residents of Lee Township, both black and white, were killed and wounded, despite the fact the events in Pope County attracted national attention. The extent newspapers provide very little information regarding what happened and what perpetrated the violence. White versus blacks. Again, this is typical of newspapers back in those days. Law takes a hand against the lawless gang. Of course, the lawless gang is black. On May 29, 1897, white employees of the Sayre Lumber Company near Prescott, Nevada County, set fire to a cabin where 10 of the company's African-American workers were sleeping. When the black laborers attempted to flee, the mob fired shots at them. No one was killed, and due to the due diligence of the private detective, indictments were actually brought down in the case. According to the Arkansas Gazette, by July 24th, Detective A.W. Clay had returned the following 2-month investigation into the case. On the basis of his evidence, Deal Beck, Willis Beck, Tom Johnson, and Ellen Sherry were indicted for arson and assault with attempt to kill. The 4 were acquitted of all charges, typical in those days, in January 1898 in the Nevada County Circuit Court because the judge said, unreliable evidence, they're white guys, so anything you say, it's unreliable. One more body sways in the air, another lynching. Tom Waller, another colored man, struck up by the mob. After the Civil War ended in 1895, African Americans were terrorized by the lynching of men, women, and children. The acts of violence were most common in 8 states: Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Maryland, Missouri, Ohio, Oklahoma, which wasn't a state at that point, and West Virginia. The lynching mobs generally got away with the crime. President McKinley denounced lynching, but he did nothing in terms of civil rights. It's too bad there's lynching going on, but I'm only the president. I can't do anything about it. On December 15th, a white mob of 400 men lynched an African-American man by the name of Tom Waller in Lawrence County, Mississippi. Waller was accused of helping to murder a white family despite a lack of evidence against him and the strenuous claims of innocence. Without a legal trial or investigation, an angry white mob hanged him from a tree the same night he was arrested. A week earlier, after a white family was found murdered, a surviving 5-year-old child claimed a black man did it. Officials brought several black male suspects before her, and she identified a man by the name of Charles Lewis as the perpetrator. A mob of hundreds immediately formed and lynched Lewis on December the 10th. There were 158 lynchings in the United States in 1897. 123 blacks, 35 whites were killed. Women's rights. Now I'm going to ask you this question. Do women have the right to go to college? Yes or no? Do women have the right to vote? Yes or no? Well, back then, the answer to voting, no. Answer to college, we really don't want you here. We don't want you at all. There was one thing that women did back in the 1890s that freed them. They learned how to ride bicycles. They learned how to ride. And you know what that did? They could ride a bicycle around and get from point A to point B. They didn't have to depend on anybody else. The bicycle becomes an important part of the women's rights struggle. They don't depend on men anymore to take them by horse or to get on a stagecoach, or you could go on the train, subway in those days. There were some trains around, subways around. But anyway, the women's rights movement. Significant strides were made in the women's rights movement, particularly regarding voting rights in Australia. The National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies was formed, uniting local suffrage groups and centralizing the effort to gain voting rights for women. In the United States, despite McKinley's pledge to support women's rights as part of his 1896 presidential campaign, there was no support. In March, women in Eugene, Oregon are prevented from voting in local school elections. On June 4th, the Constitution of the state of Delaware is adopted. It retains male as a qualification for voting, despite attempts to remove the requirement. Voters in New Jersey, and from 1776 to 1807, women in New Jersey were allowed to vote. Then the vote was taken away from them in 1807. Voters in New Jersey defeated a proposal to allow women to vote in school elections. Voters in the Oklahoma Territory defeat a proposal for women's access to the vote. Gold! There's gold to be found in them there hills. Ho to the Klondike, make your fortune, gold, gold, gold. Join the journey. And you caught the boat in Seattle, and you went up to the Yukon. Now, you got off, and then you had to make an arduous journey to where the gold fields were. On August 16, 1896, Skookum Jim and his family found gold near the Klondike River in Canada's Yukon Territory. Their discovery sparked one of the most frantic gold rushes in history. Nearby miners immediately flocked to the Klondike to stake the rest of the gold claims. Conditions in the Yukon were harsh and made communications with the outside world as difficult at best. As a result, the word that there was gold in them there hills in the Klondike didn't get out till 1897. Almost a year later, a wave of gold seekers bought supplies, boarded ships to Seattle and other West Coast cities. You ever hear of a place called Nordstrom's?
Yes.
It started there. Eddie Bauer?
Yeah.
Yeah, It started with the gold rush, and it made Seattle a major port on the West Coast. They headed north thinking they'd strike it rich. More than 100,000 people from all walks of life abandoned their homes and embarked on an extended, life-threatening journey across the treacherous, icy valleys and harrowing, rocky terrain. Gold finally arrived. It's hard to imagine the grit and stamina required to get this far. It's the Klondike goldfields. Still, arrival was no guarantee of success. The Herculean efforts led to riches for very few. In fact, by the time that the earliest stampeders arrived, most good claims had been taken by miners already in the vicinity at the time of the original strike. So you got up there in 1897, you probably weren't going to find too much. Less than half of those who started the trek to the Yukon arrived. Those who got there safely stood very little chance of finding gold. By midsummer, there were 18,000 people in Dawson, more than 5,000 working at the diggings. By August, many of the stampeders had started for home, most of them broke. There really wasn't much gold to be found. The great Klondike gold rush ended as suddenly as it began. Towns such as Dawson City and Skagway. Anybody ever been to Skagway?
Yes.
You have. There are two businesses there. One of them just selling junk, hats, shirts, refrigerator magnets. I have all three. And there's the Reds. There is a saloon. I think there's a saloon in Skagway. Yeah, there is that saloon in Skagway. Anyway, others such as Dye began to disappear altogether. The discovery of Yukon gold made a few lucky miners beyond rich in their wildest dreams, and many people made their fortunes off the back of other miners chasing those dreams. The influx to Dawson turned it into a legitimate city. It also led to a population boom in the Yukon Territory. It's 40 degrees below zero on the best days in the Yukon Territory. It's cold. Alberta, British Columbia, and in Vancouver, which is maybe the prettiest city in North America, Vancouver. William McKinley's America was confined to an area with Canada to the north, two nations to the coast, and Mexico to the south. There was also the territory of Alaska, which was separated from America by Canada. The McKinley administration did have a deal in place to annex Hawaii, but did not formally sign the deal. America was an isolationist country. McKinley had no interest in the Philippines or the month-long war between Greece and Turkey. That is Sitka, Alaska. Sitka, Alaska was the last capital of Russia, Alaska. And I was up there on the 4th of July in 2017. And there is still a slight Russian presence in that city, but it's just some architecture at this point. William McKinley didn't have much interest in expanding in the United States, although he did have some concerns about Spain's poor treatment of Cubans. Cubans were thrown into what would be considered today concentration camps. Where do you think Hitler got the idea of concentration camps? Cuba. In McKinley's address to Congress on December 6, he stated that while the government of Spain should be given time to reform its behavior in Cuba, America would continue to devote significant diplomatic attention to the island. McKinley also reminded Americans to refrain from factionalism, questions of foreign policy, of revenue, the soundness of currency, the inviolability of national obligations, the improvement of public service, appeal to the individual conscience of every earnest citizen, to whatever party he belongs or whatever section of the country he may reside. That is the first subway station in the United States, the first subway station in Boston. Subway didn't run, it was rather short, but it is a first. Okay, there is a subway in London, which is a lot bigger than Boston, but it's still in use, the Park Street Station. The first public transit subway in America was constructed as a response to intense traffic which choked downtown Boston in the 1890s. This was not from cars. Very few cars around. This was other stuff that was going on in Boston. The spine of the congested district from Scollay Square, the nexus for the streetcar lines down Tremont Street to Boylston Street. Responding to the crisis of the streetcar blockades, the state and city convened a rapid transit commission whose 1892 final report mapped out solutions for Boston's traffic problems, including potential routes to expedite railways through the downtown. The first two subway stations opened to the public were the Boyle Street and Park Street stations, with service commencing on the morning of September 1st. More than 100,000 people would take the 3.5-minute trip that day. It wasn't very big, 3.5 minutes. Oldsmobile, driving Oldsmobile, right? Well, this guy is Olds. His name is Ransom Eli Olds, and he is from Lansing, Michigan. And it's August 21st, and he is the founder of the Olds Motor Vehicle Company. Born in Geneva, Ohio in 1864, Olds went to work for his family's machine repair and engine building business in 1883. In 1896, he completed his first gasoline-powered vehicle, and the following year, he founded the Olds Motor Vehicle Company with financial backing from Samuel L. Smith, who had made his fortune in lumber. Olds and his team built 4 cars. It's a start. So it was, well, I'm going to be Groucho Marx here. You know, you've all been on You Bet Your Life. You didn't get any of the questions right, so I got to ask you a question so you can win $10. What was the color of George Washington's white horse? White. Who's buried in Grant's tomb?
No.
Grant. But Groucho was proven wrong. He's not buried in Grant's tomb. On April 27th, Grant's tomb was dedicated. The dedication mark would have been the 18th President, Ulysses S. Grant's 75th birthday. Despite inclement weather, the dedication drew an estimated 1 million spectators, as well as 50,000 marchers who paraded to the tomb from Madison Square Park. 6 miles north, Madison Square Park is over on Madison Avenue, near the Empire State Building. Today. Upon Grant's death in July 1885, his widow indicated his wish to be interred in New York. Within days, a site in Riverside Park was selected and the Grant Monument Association was established to appeal for funds. So, you've been great players. Unfortunately, Fenneman, they didn't win any money, but we'll ask them one more question. Who's buried in Grant's tomb? Grant. Well, who's buried in Grant's tomb? Asked Groucho Marx of the inept contestant on his 1950s radio and television show, You Bet Your Life. By this point, Groucho's contestant had failed to correctly answer any of the trivia questions posted. Groucho accepted a range of responses. Grant, Mrs. Grant, or the right answer, no one. Grant's tomb, a mausoleum, does not contain Grant's remains. They are entombed, but not buried. This is the first fight. Men went to see fights. it was unladylike for a woman to be at a prize fight because you had gamblers, you had thugs, you had gun-toting people. You had people that you wouldn't exactly want to be surrounded with. But anyway, that is the first fight. The Corbett Fitzsimmons fight is a documentary film directed by Enoch J. Rector depicting the boxing match between James J. Corbett and Bob Fitzsimmons, Carson City, Nevada, St. Patrick's Day, March 17. The original running time was 100 minutes. It was the longest film to be released to date. It is considered the world's first feature film. Fitzsimmons won the fight, knocking out Corbett in the 14th round. But historically today, that doesn't matter. What matters is a piece of this film still exists. The film premiered on May 22nd at the New York Academy of Music, 14th Street. Remember that down on 14th Street? The Academy of Music? That became a concert venue. Where it was presented with live running commentary. Somebody was telling you what was going on. Film was also shown in Boston, Chicago, Buffalo, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, San Francisco, Portland, Oregon, London, England, Cardiff, Wales, Dublin, Ireland, and Tucson. The film is Tucson, Arizona, which was a territory, not a state in those days. Film is also notable because at that time, women were essentially prohibited from viewing boxing matches, which were seen as a stag activity. But if they wanted to, they could go and see this film. That's a computer today, right? That computer, I just retired that computer. It was 6 years old and it's about ready. The journal Engineering used the word computer for the first time to describe a mechanical device capable of performing calculations. Before 1897, computer was primarily used to refer to a person who performed complex calculations like a mathematician or a bookkeeper. Computer becomes a machine in 1897. You're a machine. The first TV. Now, would you watch that? Would you watch that? No. That is the first TV. The German physicist Carl Ferdinand Braun invented a cathode ray tube, CRT. The CRT harnessed an electron beam to create real-time visual displays on the fluorescent screen, setting the stage for the development of television and the modern computer screen. This thing came out of Braun's invention, this thing. How many of you like ice cream? One scoop or two? As many as you want. Well, this guy, Alfred Krail, he invented this. And he got a patent on this. He really got a patent on this. Working as a porter at the Marco Brothers drugstore in Pittsburgh, Alfred Krail noticed his fellow employees struggling to scoop ice cream cones for customers. He decided to design a contraption to scoop ice cream easily with one hand. I guess they couldn't figure out how to use a spoon. Anyway, his invention, which he called the ice cream mold and disher, received a federal patent on February 2nd. According to his patent application, the disher will be extremely simple in its construction, strong, durable, effective in its operation, and comparatively inexpensive to manufacture. When you had kids, how many of you had a scooper at home? Thank you, Alfred Krail. Dracula. Remember Dracula? Dracula. Bram Stoker. It's a Gothic novel by the Irish author Bram Stoker. The narrative is related through letters, diary entries, and newspaper articles. Has no single protagonist and opens with a solicitor, Jonathan Hecker, taking his business trip to stay at a castle in Transylvania, Cluj, Romania. There's a performer I know who comes from Cluj, Romania, and acts like Dracula. He's a piano player, and he puts on the suit and all and entertains on cruise ships. The nobleman, Count Dracula. Harker flees after learning that Dracula is a vampire, and the Count moves to England and plagues the seaside town of Whitby. A small group led by Abraham Van Helsing hunts and kills him. All the news that's fit to print There you go. From April 27, 2025, the Coliseum, which was the first real sports stadium, and it was a multi-use sports stadium over 2,000 years ago. Adolph S. Oakes, the owner of the New York Times, created the famous slogan, "All the news that's fit to print," which still appears on the masthead of the newspaper today. He wrote the slogan as a declaration of the newspaper's intention to report the news impartially during the yellow journalism wars in New York. He was reacting to that and the competition from the New York World and the New York Journal. This style of journalism, yellow journalism, characterized by sensationalism and exaggerated reporting, gained traction as publishers sought to increase circulation by appealing to a broader audience. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. That is the New York Sun masthead. That is my name. That is the date of publication, and I had a story in the New York Sun. But that version of the New York Sun didn't last. It's now online. I told them to go online back then. They didn't listen to me. It took them years to go online and also have video. If they would have listened to me, I'd still be working for them. Anyway, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. Dear editor, I'm 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there's no Santa Claus. Papa says if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Virginia O'Hanlon, 115 West 95th Street, New York City. Well, the columnist Francis Church responded, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist. And you know that they abound and give to your life the highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would the world be if there were no Santa Claus? It would be as dreary as if there are no Virginias. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. And 128 years later, people are saying, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance to make tolerable this existence. We should have no enjoyment except in sense and sight. The external light which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. Not to believe in Santa Claus, you might as well not believe in fairies. You might get your pauper to hire men to watch in all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus. But even if they didn't see Santa Claus coming down, what would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus, but there's no sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that no children or men can see. Do you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not. But there's no proof that they aren't there. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders that are unseen or unseeable in the world. No Santa Claus. Thank God he lives. And he lives forever. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, nay, 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of childhood. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. Now, there's Grover Cleveland. He's got a hat on. I got a hat on. We're going to go down Fifth Avenue, walking with our fancy sticks, with our hats. Historians do not rank Grover Cleveland as highly as president. He did help create a solid South for the Democrats by encouraging former Confederates to believe they had a friend in the White House. Called out the federal troops during the Pullman strike in 1894 and was known as a Union buster. He threatened Britain with war over the Venezuela boundary dispute, which set the tone for the modern executive. Regarding social policy, Cleveland comes across as racially intolerant. Cleveland's failure to deal with the Panic of 1893 handed McKinley the White House in 1896. As of May 12th, you could buy that coin from the U.S. Mint. It was put out on May 12th, just 2 days ago. William McKinley was assassinated in Buffalo, New York on September 6, 1901. He died 8 days later. He was 58. For many years, McKinley's presidency was considered just mediocre by historians. He was, many of them believe, an executive who was easily controlled by political cronies like Mark Hanna, who was pressured into war with Spain in 1898 by the media, specifically William Randolph Hearst, and public outrage. But McKinley put America on the road to being a world power and ushered in an era of world leadership, annexing Hawaii and acquiring Guam, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines after America won the 1898 Spanish-American War. He also added American Samoa, Wake Island to the newly formed empire. Cuba got its independence in 1902 and the Philippines in 1946. The Latimer Massacre is remembered by Pennsylvania historians. The backlash against immigrant miners took hold to such a degree that 2 years later, the United Mine Workers Association of America, President John Mitchell, called for a strike and added a plea for more exclusive union. The coal you dig isn't Slavish or Polish or Irish coal, it's just coal, he explained. The phrase became a rallying cry for the 1900 strike, as well as the famous 1902 anthracite coal strike, which won better working conditions, shorter working day, and wage hikes. With increasing support from foreign-born workers, the UMWA began to recognize Latimer as an event that cemented new immigrants' labor's loyalty to the Union. A Latimer Memorial was dedicated in 1972. Emmett Till, he was killed in 1955. A couple years ago, the United States government made lynching a hate crime. On March 22nd, 2022, United States President Joe Biden signed the bill into law to make lynching a federal crime more than 100 years after such legislation was proposed. House of Representatives voted 422-3 on March 7th, 2022. 8 of the members didn't vote. Cleared the Senate by unanimous consent. The 3 House Republicans, Thomas Massey of Kentucky, Chip Roy of Texas, Andrew Clyde of Georgia, voted against the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act of 2022. The women's movement, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Stanton died in 1902, Anthony in 1906. Many men and women tried to keep their movement going to secure women's voting rights. Most women, but not all women in the United States, did get the right to vote in 1920 because of a constitutional amendment. All indigenous Australians were granted the right to vote at federal elections in 1962. The qualifying age of voting lowered from 218 in 1973 in Australia. Camp Skagway is that way. During the Klondike Gold Rush, Seattle transformed from a small port city to a major center of activity and business. It became the primary staging area and outfitting point for prospectors heading to the gold fields in the Yukon and Alaska. Influx of people to Dawson turned it into a legitimate city. It led to the population boom in Yukon Territory, Alberta, British Columbia, and Vancouver. The Klondike Gold Rush had horrific impact on the local environment, causing massive soil erosion, water contamination, deforestation, and loss of native wildlife, among other things. The gold rush also severely impacted the native people as they fell victim to new diseases as smallpox and the introduction of casual drinking and drunkardness. Hello, it's Hawaii, Kona, Hawaii, on the Big Island. And there is a Boston Transit, the Boston transit car of those days. Other American cities followed Boston's example. New York opened nearly 9 miles of subway in October 1904. Philadelphia's system was built between 1905 and 1908. It combined underground surface and elevated lines just as the Boston T does. Today, the T serves over 1.3 million passengers daily through the system. There's your Oldsmobile. Buy an Oldsmobile. In 1900, the Oldsmobile name was first used. William Durant acquired Oldsmobile in 1908 during his creation of General Motors. Various times in its existence, Oldsmobile was able to pass as a luxury vehicle manufacturer. Most of the time, General Motors used Oldsmobile to fulfill a middle ground in terms of luxury level. The last Oldsmobile came off the lines in 2004, the Alero GLS Final 500 Collector's Edition. That was April 29th, 2004. Ah yes, Grant's tomb. Jazz concerts have been hosted outside the Grant's tomb since at least 1975. Since then, concerts have regularly been held outside or inside Grant's tomb. Celebration is held at the memorial every year on April 27th, Grant's birthday. Harlem Week events took place outside the Grant's tomb. New York's WNBC TV also hosted Independence Day television specials featuring Grant's tomb in the background. These specials showcase performers such as Bon Jovi and Beyonce. She sung in front of Grant's tomb. That's one of the few pieces, fragments of the film that still exists between the Corbett, in the fight between Corbett and Fitzsimmons. It no longer exists in its entirety. It is known from contemporary sources that the film included all 14 rounds of the event, each round lasting 3 minutes. Only fragments of the film survive. Prize fighting in those days, illegal in 21 states. Many cities and states tried to ban the film, but their efforts to ban the fight film, were unsuccessful. The film is considered the first pay-per-view boxing match, and the remaining fragments of the films are part of the Library of Congress. Oh, the computer. Dairy Queen. 1897 legacy. More than 21 centuries ago, scientists in Greece created a mechanism that used brass gear wheels to predict the movements of the sun, the moon, and probably most of the planets, essentially inventing the world's first computer. Believe that? 21 centuries ago? That device was found in a shipwreck in 1901. On February 15, 1946, Ursinus Professor of Physics John Macaulay and University of Pennsylvania Professor J. Presser Eckert unveiled their invention to the public, ENIAC, the first modern computer. My wife sung a national anthem at Madison Square Garden. She was on TV singing the anthem at Madison Square Garden. This is back in 1985. The first successful television system was invented and demonstrated by Philo Farnsworth in 1927. While other earlier mechanical television devices existed, Farnsworth was the first fully electronic system transmitting a straight line on September 7, 1927. The Nazis perfected TV. Nazi leaders determined to beat Great Britain in the U.S. to be the first world's television broadcaster began Greater German Television in March 1938. W2XBS, New York, today WNBC Channel 4, began commercial broadcasts on April 30th, 1939, with President Franklin Roosevelt's opening remarks at the New York World's Fair. Dairy Queen, that's in Ohio, right over the Pennsylvania border. It's a good Dairy Queen, really good Dairy Queen. Anyway, Alfred Crowe never profited from his ice cream scoop invention. He was the first man of color in Pittsburgh to receive a patent for an invention. Oh, Dracula. Well, you know, that's Grandpa. Shows you what Dracula can become. He can become a character in a television show. Dracula has been adapted many times, virtually across all forms of media. The novel and its characters have been adapted for film, television, video games, animation over 700 times. There have been 1,000 more appearances in comic books and on the stage. In 2015, the Guinness Book of World Records named Dracula the most portrayed literary character. The New York Times, all the news that's fit to print. There were more than a dozen New York newspapers in 1897. Only 2 have survived, Oak's Times and Alexander Hamilton's New York Post, founded in 1801. A third New York City newspaper is barely hanging on, the Daily News, which started in 1919. The newspaper industry in the United States is on life support. Most big cities have just one newspaper. Newspaper staffs have been cut and advertisers are spending money on other media platforms. In Virginia, yes, there is a Santa Claus. Santa Claus has been the subject of countless films, cartoons, television shows, with radio programs and recordings. Numerous actors have played Santa Claus, including Ed Asner and Fred Astaire. The best known Santa Claus movie, Miracle on 34th Street. Thank you so much. Any questions, any comments? It is your